The astronauts were meant to return only 10 days after they arrived at the International Space Station. There was an issue with the return capsule that they were going to be on. This meant that they were up there. I know people have said that they were stuck or stranded, but in reality, space activity is unpredictable, and I think that the astronauts were ready to perform and be engaged in the mission on a longer term. It isn't unusual for space activities to have rogue elements. I think nowadays we see space as contributing to things like our communications and weather and navigation. So we're used to being very everyday, but in reality, space is still a difficult activity, in particular when it includes a human element. So although we try to plan for things that might happen, there are always going to be the potential for delays and unplanned activities. The safety of astronauts is primary for NASA and any other space agency. We really want to make sure that the people that we put into space are safe. And so there was a preponderance of caution in not allowing the astronauts to return on the vessel that they were meant to do so. As such, they stayed on the International Space Station for 9 months. That's great. We had the capacity for them to have food and activities to do there, and therefore they were brought down when it was deemed to be safe. But safety is paramount to any space activities. The impact of people staying in space for a long time is something that's been studied a lot. This includes both the physical and the mental impact that people experience from being there for a long time. Physically, we know that there are things like it affects bone density and your heart rate and so on, and those will all have been closely monitored upon landing. There's also the mental impact, and these can be both positive and negative. If you think about it, it's like being enclosed in a space with other people for a long period of time. But astronauts are chosen because they have a lot of flexibility in their mentality, and they tend to be really nice people. And so I think even though these astronauts thought that they were going up for a very short period of time, they will have been ready to cope with the challenges that meant staying up there for 9 months. Astronauts returning to Earth will have to reintegrate to the idea of physically and mentally being back in gravity. This includes physical aspects, which have medical implications, but also mentally coping with the idea that they've been up there and seeing things that nobody else has seen, or a small number of people have seen. But again, astronauts are chosen because they are robust people. It's great news to learn that these 2 astronauts are returning to Earth, and they will have had a complicated but hopefully fruitful experience on the International Space Station, which they might not have expected, but we welcome them back to Earth.
The main things that happen to people are there's an adaptation phase that happens right away when you get up to space. The components of that are some motion disturbances that can lead to basically a kind of motion sickness in some people. And then the other factor is after that, or the process that your body undergoes to adapt to this new environment that doesn't have gravity in it. And in those areas where the bones support those large muscle groups, like in the hips and the low back and the legs, what we measure is reabsorption of the calcium in the bone in those areas. So that's one of the reasons why exercise is such a big component of any crew day on all the missions that we fly, because as soon as you enter that weightlessness environment, your body starts being responsive to that, and those the calcium loss and the strength loss and the loss in the ability to work, called aerobic capacity, those all start decreasing if you don't do anything to counteract it. Radiation has a number of effects on cells, but basically you're worried about it, depending on the kind of dose, breaking down the way the cells work and potentially introducing breaks and changes into the proteins and the DNA that's within the cell. So the good news is that we monitor this very closely, and we have the crew will wear basically a radiation dosimeter throughout each mission, and so we'll be able to understand more clearly the amount of radiation that they received. And we have some fairly defined and strict levels for the crew. We don't ever want them to get substantial amounts of radiation such that it substantially increases risks of concerning things like development of cancers and stuff like that. And